everybody, how we doing today? Time to talk about Canada, our northern neighbor. So, Canada's British Columbia takes... Oh, wait a minute. What? The ad scrolls down with me. Damn it. I need to get an ad blocker on here. Hold on. Canada's British Columbia takes first step to implement UN Accord on Indigenous Peoples' Rights. The Canadian province of British Columbia took its first steps on Thursday toward implementing the landmark UN Agreement on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which provides a legal framework for government's relationship with Indigenous peoples, including formally giving them a say in matters affecting their rights. Well, as far as I'm a nativist. I'm a nativist nationalist. So as far as I'm concerned, within America and Canada, the Indians should come first. It's their land. And I say any land that belongs historically should be given back. And then people who are basically just colonists and former slaves can live in the spaces in between. And there were a lot of spaces in between historic tribal lands that were normally empty spaces where buffalo could run around and shit. I suppose that would make it a little too crowded, possibly. But what else are you going to do? If the legislation passes, British Columbia will be the first province in Canada to formally adopt the standards set out in the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. The bill is about ending discrimination, respecting human rights, and ensuring economic fairness. Scott Fraser, Provincial Minister for Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation, said while introducing this legislation. Implementation of the UN Declaration would result in the government seeking active consent from Indigenous communities while making decisions rather than merely consulting with them, according to Bruce McIver, a principal at First Peoples Law, an Indigenous rights law firm in Vancouver. It's a very different world than what you have currently, where Indigenous people rightly have the impression that in most situations all that consultation is an opportunity for the government to blow off steam, McIver said. Canada was one of 4 countries to vote against the declaration in 2007, joined by Australia, New Zealand, and the United States, all countries with indigenous populations and long histories of violent colonization. Oh, indeed, indeed. Some people like to tell stories about smallpox-lined blankets, but how do you line a blanket with smallpox? Chances are they were just happened to be infected and they were simply offering blankets. You know how, in this country, how the left wing these days likes to vilify. The minute they find anything wrong with someone they disagree with, they overemphasize what was wrong with them. And they unnecessarily vilify and rely on black and white sort of thinking. Admittedly, there was indeed a great deal of violence. No question of that. Indigenous people make up 5% of the Canadian population. Although Canada endorsed the declaration in 2016, it is yet to formally implement the measure. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau committed in 2015 to doing so. But federal legislation to that effect died in the Senate in June. Trudeau, who won a second term this week but lost his parliamentary majority, said previously his government would attempt to implement the declaration if re-elected. McIver said requiring consent was not the same as having veto power, a key concern that held up the federal legislation in the Senate. The British Columbia bill unanimously passed its first legislative hurdle on Thursday and faces its next step on Monday. Fraser's office worked with First Nations Summit, FSN, which represents the majority of British Columbia, Indigenous councils, and others to write the bill. The provincial government has a long history of denying the very existence and rights of Indigenous peoples. Cheryl Kaesmer, one of the 3 political executives for FSN, said in a statement, "Well, that's just messed up. Like I said, I'm a nativist. I'm a nativist nationalist. If your particular race or ethnic group is native to that land, then it is your land by right, and it is yours to share or not share as you see fit. The history of colonization in this part of the world is a very bloody affair, exaggerated to all hell by some, but nonetheless still very violent and highly inappropriate. If Europeans really wanted to be here so bad, then they should have assimilated into the culture. Just like I think that immigrants coming here should assimilate into our culture, unless they're just seeking temporary asylum. Oh, but there was that, whole thing about being Christian that preventing you from joining the beliefs of the wicked savages. Because you're so damn superior. Yeah, right. In many ways, compared to the Indians, the Europeans were completely backwards. But anyway, that's about all. Peace.